Shalom! Today is March 17th, first day of creation. Kaif has been out here all morning marking the table. This is our midday mark right here. So even if we're just on top of it, we can see that there's still a curve today. And definitely on the armillary, we would see this arm right here. This shadow would be straight across this arm. And we see how it is curved. So that tells us today is not the day of the dewy sunrise, which is the mark we look for in this wheel of counting. So what we are doing today, yesterday was the 365th day after creation. So we have wheels within wheels that we are counting.
Let's talk cycles, endings and beginnings, because this is the season for such things. Now, I was on social media chatting the other day, and it was clear that people aren't understanding the different wheels or circuits that we are dealing with this time of year, the endings and the beginnings of wheels in wheels. Genesis details the first week of creation. We see that right here on the bottom of our calendar. This is the first week of creation. And in the first week of creation is where the Sabbath is the seventh day, right? So the book of Jubilees then further expounds on that and tells us that this creation cycle, this year that Jubilees is talking about, which is the creation cycle, is 52 weeks long, divided into 4 quarters of 13 weeks each. And thus ending, so if we count from the first day of creation and count all the way through the year, 364 days ends on the last Sabbath of the creation cycle. This is the very last Sabbath of the year, 52 weeks. All weeks end with the Sabbath. So if Jubilees is telling us that the year is 52 weeks, that means that we have 52 Sabbaths, right? So this equates to 364 days in this cycle that we will call the creation cycle of Sabbaths. Because then it starts anew on day 1 of creation. Then we are instructed by Enoch to count a different circuit of 364 days, starting with the due east sunrise, or as he says, when the sun shines in the face of the sky. So this due east rising aligns with the east gate of the tabernacle. The morning that the sun rises due east, the night before, it becomes equalized. Now we're talking about equinox, and Enoch says that day, the very last day of the year, this last intercalary day, that night becomes equalized because we're talking about equinox. Nox is night, lux is day. This isn't the equilux, this is the equinox. Enoch tells us that day, the last day of the year, after the day has passed and it is nighttime, then the nighttime portion becomes 9 parts and then is equalized with the daylight portion. Well, the daylight portion of the last intercalary day has already passed. This 364th day has already passed. That night is equalized then with the following day, which is day 1 of the year or day 4 of creation, depending on which cycle we're counting. So this cycle that begins here, this 364-day cycle that begins with the due east rising, we're going to call that the priestly cycle of feasts, because this is where the priests start counting the days to the feasts. Day 4 of creation, because this is when time was set in motion. This is when the sun, moon, and stars were assigned their timekeeping duties. And so this is the day that the priests used to start counting the months and thus the feasts, because the months regulate the feasts. So this is the priestly cycle of feasts. Now, unfortunately, the solar cycle and the creation cycle of Sabbaths are no longer in sync with each other due to the effects the deluge had on the planet, adding 1.24 days to the solar cycle. For we know that Enoch attests to a 364-day year during his lifetime. Then Enoch also gives us the names of this added time as Halo-Jasaph and Aspha'el, who he says are at the end of the circuit. Or in other words, they are time that are outside the 364 days of Enoch's year. They're outside the 364, whether you want to call them the days out of time, days out of creation. Many ancient cultures, they not only recognized this day, this last day, as the day out of time, but the additional 4 days. So ancient cultures thought of these 5 days as extra days outside of the upright 360. Nothing now is in sync due to sin. There was originally 360 days, and then 4 days were added. Enoch tells us where those 4 days were added through the year, and he calls them the epigeminal days or the intercalary days. So these were added, and then an additional 1.24 days is what we have in our modern solar cycle. So this is what we're watching this time of year. So here in Enoch 72:4 is where we see Enoch talking about the great light, whose name is the sun. And in verse 5 is where Enoch tells us, where the sun sets in the sky in the west and returns by the northeast in order to go to the east. So from our perspective here in the northern hemisphere, the sun is hanging out in the south. So Enoch is telling us that the sun is moving in a northeasterly direction as it heads back towards the middle eastern portal. During the winter, which is where it's coming out of, the sun is coming out of its winter place into its spring place in the middle of the heaven, coming out of its winter place where it hangs out in the south. That's why the birds go south in the winter, because they're following the sun southward. And it has to now move northerly or northeasterly in order to go back to the middle, to the east. So then Enoch 72 verse 6 says, in this manner it rises in the first month through the great gate. It proceeds through this gate, which is the fourth among those 6 openings, which are located in the direction of the east. So again, in this manner, it rises in the first month in the eastern gate in the middle. So great gate in Hebrew is the Gadol, Dalet. And Dalet is the 4th letter of the Hebrew alphabet. Now pictorially, Dalet is a door or passageway. So we're going from the old year to the new year through the Gadol, Dalet, to this 4th great gate, which marks the 4th day of creation. And this starts the priestly cycle. We need to remember the most important thing is to keep this 7th-day Sabbath in its creation cycle. These are memorial days. And then people will argue, well, you have this extra day, so then your Sabbaths are out of a 7-day rotation. But here Enoch tells us that these intercalary days are not counted. So when we don't count them, you can see here on my little graphic on my calendar, we have the 364th day of the creation cycle. But when we don't count the intercalary days, this is the 358th day of the priestly cycle, the festal cycle. So then we have 1, 2, 3. We don't count the intercalary day, 4, 5, 6, 7. So this is how the Sabbath of creation has been retained, through not counting these intercalary days, the 1 day each quarter that keeps everything balanced. So instead of piling all the extra days at the end, like ancient cultures did, Enoch tells us to put these intercalary days, or these not counted days, scattered throughout the year to keep it balanced. So this is what we're watching for this time of year. When we're watching the shadows and the bends, this is the day that I call the smiley face day. And my husband says it's all your perspective and which way you're looking at it. So we're going to call this the frowny face day instead of smiley face day. I'm going to stand on the other side of the table. And this is going to be the frowny face day. Then we have our straight face day, straight line. Then we have our smiley face day. So frowny face, straight face, smiley face. He said it's all about perspective. So this is this time of year where Enoch tells us to balance this priestly count, this count of the feast days. 2 different wheels, 2 different counts. Don't get confused between this additional days of Halo Jasaph and Asphael and the 4 intercalary days. All of those days are counted outside the perfect 360 to keep the perfect Sabbath in its perpetual state. Days were added due to sin, and it obscured the Sabbath day. But it's still there, and Enoch has given us directions on how to find it. So this is why it's important to understand why these days aren't counted, how they came to be, and how we number our days correctly to keep the Sabbath. It's all about the Sabbath, because that is the mark of our Creator's people. He says that over and over again in the Word. The Sabbath day is the mark that we carry that says we are His. And it's all about keeping that Sabbath day, the memorial of creation, in its proper place. So that's how the intercalary days work, and how this extra additional days that happened at the deluge, at the flood. Okay, so if you have questions of what we're doing, we're going to continue watching through the week and finding that straight line shadow so we can show you. Now, some people will start the new year the day after the straight line shadow for various reasons. Some say that, it takes all day to find that straight line, which we're told that dewy sun rising is the mark. Not necessarily the straight line shadow. That is just a result, a byproduct of the dewy sunrise, that it projects a straight line shadow. That's the sign, the due east rising of the sun, that then projects the straight line shadow. Okay? So it's important to understand these differences. And I know it may be confusing at first, but once you see the pattern and how and why these days came about, it's a little easier to understand why we have these not counted days. And this day here is the day that Job speaks about, where he compares it to the night of his conception, saying that it was a day that is not counted within the year, outside of time. And that would be this creation cycle. Outside the creation cycle, this additional day. Then we go back into our creation cycle that is verified by day 4. We can count back to day 1, count forward to day 7. All marked by these luminaries in the heaven that Yahuwah says will be signs marking His days, His feast days and His Sabbaths, His jubilees and sabbatical years. Those are the important days to Yahuwah. Those are the days He tells us to number, to keep, and guard. Okay, so I hope this helps a little bit, and just follow along this week as we go through these days and watch the line straighten. I'll have the armillary out so we can see that first ray of sunlight coming through, hitting that straight line mark on the armillary that morning. And we can see exactly what I'm talking about. Yahuwah willing, I have to say, and there's no clouds. So let's say a little prayer that the skies will be clear. They're supposed to be. So as always, if you have questions about this or anything else that we talk about, feel free to contact us at remnantofthe light@gmail.com. And we want to give all praise and glory to the Most High for showing us these things and teaching us how to return to the proper appointed times to meet with Him. This is where we get our instructions from the Most High, from the boss. And if we're not in that staff meeting, we miss out on those instructions. So until we meet again, I'm going to wish you shalom, shalom.
Shalom, shalom.